Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month is a new year. It's 2023 when you guys will be listening to this. We recorded this earlier, but it's an exciting year in the sense that we are talking about starting a new chapter. And what does it mean to us when it comes to the idea of starting a new chapter? We're going to be diving into this topic, stepping forward and what a new chapter may mean. Maybe it's a step towards a better direction, but a lot of times there's a process to it. Today we have a new guest. His name is Keith. I hope I don't brutalize your last name. Is it Coney?
Coney like
okay.
Ireland.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on and just sharing your
Thanks
insight.
for having me.
No problem. Disclaimer for those in the U.S. and the States, 988 is our suicide crisis lifeline, but I do encourage those around the world to find what resources are near you. Resources are different for each individual, so I do encourage you. I don't like reinventing the wheel, so if something worked that's positive, do it. A lot of times when it comes to recovery, it is holistic. It's individualized and it's client-led. I always say this, people say better than me. I know this a lot. So here's a quote I want to share and kind of start the conversation. New beginnings are often disguised as painful endings. What comes to mind when you hear this quote, Keith?
So painful endings sounds quite daunting for everyone,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be, because it's not about what you went through. It's about what you learned.
Mm-hmm.
And really going through difficult situations is really about changing your view of that event that happened, so that you focus on the learning rather than the event itself. That's really a point that you reach after the experience. Yeah.
I totally agree. A lot of it's remembering. You look at our calendars, there's so many things telling us to remember, but a lot of times we're bad at it. And the issue with that is, well, the good thing is you remember it, and like you said, you reframe it of what you just went through. It could be a lesson that'll help you reduce the chance of repeating it, and provide a better avenue. So I just want to continue on with this one quote from Albert Einstein. I love what he says here. It says, "No problem can be solved with the same level of consciousness that created it." What comes to mind, Keith, when you hear this quote?
That goes back to what I said previously. Really, your consciousness develops as you go through these experiences. So if you think about a difficult experience, it's a learning experience. And so really, if you can see the bigger picture and see that you're elevating your consciousness while you're going through this experience, it's actually a huge growth opportunity. They say the universe teaches through suffering. And sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't.
Nothing is more true than that, is that there's positive side to every difficult experience.
I think I totally agree in the sense that it's a process. A lot of times we don't give us, like, if the problem's been 5 years in our lives, a lot of times we want it to be solved in a month. Sometimes that process and that learning just it's not just solving the problem, it's also becoming something better, being something more, in your own life, growing in that aspect of recovery, and the idea that if you just look at least from my experience and working with clients, is that one shoe doesn't fit all, but also sometimes we just look so micro. Oh, this problem is my problem. But obviously, when we take the time and you kind of, go through the process of healing, but also give you that grace of insight, it can develop to something, like you said, that's, at least from my experience, much better than what we first anticipated. So, Keith, I want to, a lot of times with my new guests, I wanted to give them the opportunity to kind of share a little bit of themselves, what brought you to where you are right now. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to kind of share with those listening who've never met you, maybe never heard about your story, to shed light on that. whatever you feel comfortable with.
Thanks, Robert. So my story starts on Father's Day in 1997. I had wrapped a coffee mug for my father for his gift. And I was angry with him the day before, but I don't remember why if I think back now. Ironically, my feelings towards him had always been up and down with the way he had treated me, but I still loved him.
Yeah.
As I rounded the corner to pick up the phone, everything started to slow down in my mind as I think back on it now. I could still feel that look of anticipation on my face until the phone was touching my ear. The speaker didn't announce themselves, but after she said the only thing she could, I knew it was my stepmother. And I knew it was very bad news. Dad is dead. There was a split second, and then a tidal wave of questions crashed into my mind. It started a seesaw of emotions that went on for years. That terrible feeling of suicide is the sharpest pain I've ever felt. Much more than when my friend accidentally pushed a garden fork through my foot at age 6. It was many years before I started smiling again. Despite the efforts of a psychologist, I couldn't answer the question, why did he end his life on the day we all celebrated? But what I realized is that you never answer a question like that.
Yeah.
You need to change your perspective to show the positive. I learned to become extremely focused on only the positive aspects of my life. What did I learn, not what happened? I know that events strengthened my resilience, and immediately I was removed from the middle of the war between my parents following their divorce. Most of all, I learned that looking after my mental health with the help of professionals is absolutely essential. That was far from the end of the test of my faith and resilience, though. These days, I celebrate Father's Day with my kids. I haven't explained what happened to their grandfather. The second test came in 2010 when I moved to Australia with my family. I can't remember exactly how it started, but I remember seeing a GP around that time and changing medication. Losing my mental capacity in the space of a week when I was a successful, well-paid engineer meant that it wasn't long before I couldn't fill out the masses of paperwork to claim government benefits. And when I got the payment, it was so small. I shouldn't have bothered. But that's the thing, I couldn't work out what was the best option with my current mindset. As it happened, the last option was my best option. By that stage, I realized I was not going to be able to keep my house. I was broke and I hadn't been able to work for a year. I had exhausted every option. If it wasn't for the unexpected generosity of an anonymous person, my life would have been taken down a very difficult path. Around this time, we had our second baby. I don't know how I drove to the hospital. The baby almost dropped right next to me in the front seat. In the end, we made it just in time for me to catch Charlie in my bare hands. Looking back, it was an incredible moment, but at the time, I described it as a train wreck. It wasn't long after that I walked into the hospital and was involuntarily sectioned with bipolar. I was 35 years old, and that was the first time I realized I just had my fourth mental illness. Today I know diagnosis is not necessary. I lost 8 years from my career. I stood up and told my story for the first time with no preparation at a mental health training course I got an avalanche of support. In 2018, I spoke to 300 personnel in the Air Force. The commanding officer said afterwards, "We talk about moral courage. Here is someone who has shown so much moral courage." And then he shook my hand twice. I felt so driven to make a huge impact in mental health in the world. That was when I started supporting very sick people. As of today, I've supported hundreds of people out of every diagnosis in short periods of time. I gave my first international speech to the 7th Annual Mental Health Congress in September 2021. My 16th international speech was the 3rd World Mental Health Congress in June 22. During that period, I did not see any other lived experience speeches at that level. My experiences gave me courage, resilience, freedom, and excellence.
Just hearing your story is just amazing. A lot of times it kind of goes into the quote I was going to go into. A lot of times we just talk about letting go, but one thing you showed is you started over.
Several times.
Several times. It's one thing to let things go, but it's getting up and starting something you're not familiar with. It's scary. People will say, well, how do you know this? What is it? And I think what remember remembering what you just told within your story is that this is, we talk about courage, but it's different when you're experiencing it, isn't it? Like, it's different when you're going through the symptoms and someone detached from it, like experience. And I'm not minimizing, because the family's impacted too by the individual who's suffering, but at the same time, there's so many times in this story you could say, you know what, I'm tired. I have, I've been through a lot, and no one would fault you for just focusing on you. But incredible thing is, you focus on others. You focus on other people that you may not even know, because you know that it matters. A lot of times these like mental illness, all these kind of issues are complicated, but the reasons why we do it are simple. It's we think about the people who are not here right now. So
there's a couple of things you touched on. So I studied to be a life coach, and the one thing I learned about courage is that courage is all about practice. Courage is in most people is not as a natural occurrence. It's about desensitizing yourself to difficult situations and putting yourself in uncomfortable positions, but not in a way that overwhelms you, in a way that takes a little step and then another little step. So it might be a presentation to one person, and then a presentation to 10 people, and then 100. Because the key in all of this is about being gentle with yourself. I'm working with a guy at the moment, and we spoke about how he's giving up smoking. And then we spoke about what caused his mental illness. And he said it was alcohol. And I said, so you're trying to give up alcohol and smoking? I said, that's very challenging. Do you not want to step down your smoking? Well, which one's more important? First of all, it's the alcohol. So he said, let's step down the alcohol and then step down the smoking later. So the key is really to be gentle with yourself and be aware of what you're taking on,
Yeah,
if you're trying to be a world speaker at the same time as giving up smoking, it's probably not a good idea.
It's like it's reachable goals, because you don't, like, at that moment you're making these big decisions. It could be discouraging if you overwhelm yourself and it all falls.
Exactly. Yeah.
I do like how you present that. Alcohol, smoking, it's hard. People struggle with just quitting smoking, and you're gonna stop alcohol. And alcohol is interesting because it's also cultural. A lot of times you do a lot of things. If you're a heavy drinker, even if you're not, you're just with your buddies and drink. It's hard to break that cycle. And also the stress of life. So
Some people find habit forming and habit breaking very easy, and some people don't.
yeah,
And for those that don't, they need to step out of it in a slower way.
yeah,
Yeah. And that's what I do. Most of what I do at the moment is habit forming and habit breaking.
mhm,
So it's about forming habits of meditation, of mindfulness to cope with and dissolve the anxiety and depression.
mhm.
And then stepping out of the habits in their life that are not serving them. Yeah.
I like you mentioned before. I think I heard a verbiage call it healthy tension. It's like you kind of find some healthy criticism. Like you're digging for like a little bit of
Yeah,
idea. The
exactly
ideas,
right.
yeah. It's like
Something that challenges but doesn't break you.
exactly. It's a really good team building thing, especially if you're working in a company and you have a small group. It's good to have that kind of, because accountability is only a bad word when you don't feel like you're around people you can trust, or even yourself. Accountability is not a bad word. It's something you drive towards in a way. If you
Yeah.
want to, yeah.
But the other thing that runs in parallel to that discussion
Mm-hmm.
is learning never to give up.
Yeah.
This is a huge issue. And once you go through a mental illness, like my experiences, I don't give up with anything. But I'm sure there's something that I could experience in my future that will really want to make me give up and really challenge me. And that is, again, that tension.
Mm-hmm.
It's teaching me more tension in my life. As long as I can take on a manageable amount of it, then I'll recover in a reasonable amount of period. But if I take on too much, it'll take me longer and it'll be harder. But really, not giving up is another learning lesson, because a lot of people just can't face what they're dealing with and end up trying to, end up saying, I can't do it, I give up. And it comes down to who've you got around you, who've you got supporting you, and those sorts of things to lift you up again. So there's a lot of factors involved in recovering. There's not one thing, but the more events that you can recover from, the stronger you become. Your resilience goes up. And that makes the rest of your life so much easier.
Yeah, and I do like how you mentioned the people around you. One thing I've learned is, friends change. It's not that I don't feel ill about my friends of my college years or whatnot, but you have priorities are different. So maybe you have different focuses. Sometimes we put unrealistic kind of attachments or loyalties to, and you're dragging this friendship on. Not to say that you have any ill intent to them, but sometimes you have to prioritize your life in a way that makes sense to what you're trying to strive for. So I think that's the kind of gentleness, those little steps. It's not going to happen overnight, especially if you're used to going to being around a group of people that may not have the same, I guess, urgency to kind of better themselves. But it doesn't mean that they're inherently bad. It's just you're going to have to make these micro decisions to decide what is important and how you're going to address that. And a lot of times it comes with a conversation. Doesn't mean
this is just what I was going to say is language. Language is so important, because your ability to be gentle with yourself depends primarily on your thoughts and your language. And if you can, and part of what I do with a lot of people is change their language. I encourage them to actively choose a language that is gentle and positive. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. I get a person to choose their star or tell me their star sign, and if it's a water sign like Aquarius, I'll say Google water words
Mm-hmm.
and put your vocabulary together that you are going to use. I'm not talking about changing every single word.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about changing one word in each sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of saying I have a chaotic life, you can say I am flowing down a rapid.
Mm-hmm.
My life is a rapid. So that's a water word. And once you incorporate those flowing words, I mean, our body's 70% water.
Mm-hmm.
So we speak to water.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it makes a lot of sense when anybody uses water words.
Yeah, I feel, communication, how we internalize words and how we define things in our lives is very important, and the methods we do it can really bring out either something that is inviting or kind of not really inviting in the sense that how we speak to each other and how we speak to ourselves, our mind, and how we verbalize events in our lives. The gentleness comes with the vocabulary and the verbiage we use for ourselves and how we digest that. You will talk about habits. I want to ask you this question: what habits have you seen that have been helpful for those starting a new chapter, and what have not been helpful from your experience?
Yeah, I'll put a course together which actually runs a person through the habits they need to achieve in order to dissolve anxiety and depression. It starts with week 1 is mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And mindfulness is really your ability to be present in the moment where you are right now without formally closing your eyes like meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, one gentleman that I'm working with, he works in gardens. He does landscaping.
Mm-hmm.
So I said to him, right, the mindfulness book talks about running around the edges of things like door frames and that. But I said, for you, I want you to stop when you get to a garden and run around the cut grass edge. Just with your eyes, just run around the edge. And that will just draw you into the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And what that will do is it will stop your mental chaos, your mental busyness,
Mm-hmm.
just for a couple of minutes in the day, and then in the evening again.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes all the difference. Just
Yeah.
those couple of minutes in the morning and evening. So that's mindfulness. And then meditation. I've got a meditation that I use that uses low frequency as well as my meditation practice.
Mm-hmm.
And then the big one is really visualizations, is visualizing positive emotions from your history and using the power from those emotions. But I've got quite a long list of self-care habits, which includes all kinds of things. So I'll post it on LinkedIn in the next couple of weeks. Yeah.
Okay. And like anything that you want to share with those listening, I'll put it in the notes of this episode, so when they see it, they can come and check what you're doing and everything like that.
Yeah,
Okay?
if you wanna follow me, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm really proactive in supporting my network. So if you're connected to me, you'll probably get me calling you saying, "What can I do for you?" And that's just spreading that kind of spirit that we need really in today. Coming out of COVID, people need to feel that we're all together in this global team.
Yeah.
So I think having felt that we're a little bit separated, we need to come back together as a global team. So I think that's the main thing, is to undo what COVID did, is to become connected again.
Yeah. And you mentioned mindfulness, and just one thing I've noticed, and I don't know about you, but I do my best work when I slow down. When I'm able to slow my thoughts down to just work and be present in what I'm doing. I used to, I drink tea a lot, so a lot of times, especially if my mind's cluttered, I would just do each step. Sometimes I have a lot of like little steps to my tea
Yeah.
process. And I used to be one who would have a terrible habit of racing thoughts, trying to do a million things at once. I do my best work when I'm slowed down. And it's amazing. If I actually time myself of how long it takes, it's not that long. It really isn't. It really
So,
is not long.
so anxiety and fear is all about blocking logical thinking and seeing opportunities.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you get, and I talk about the situation because I speak to a lot of people who have no food or have run out of food 3 days ago. And what you find is they're completely panic stricken. And you think that's normal, but it's not normal, because you can sit there with no food for the last 3 days and not be panic stricken. And what's the difference? The difference is that you can solve your situation without the fear. And in fact, you won't solve it with the fear. So the trick is to master while times are good, to master your fear and learn coping mechanisms to master your fear and anxiety, so that when it gets to the tough times, it doesn't become overwhelming. And that comes down to prevention of mental illness. And this is something we don't talk about enough, is actively preventing mental illness.
Can you go a little bit, just share with us a little bit more on that? Because I don't hear enough either. So could you share?
Yeah, my view is it's all down to mindfulness and meditation. There's a few other quite clever technologies coming out that desensitize you to fear, and those are finding some traction. But I think the talk and the discussion around the eradication of mental illnesses in the world is quite an interesting one. What would it take to eradicate mental illnesses? We talk about a crisis, and I'm like, let's stop talking about a crisis. Let's talk about eradication. How are we going to get rid of all the mental illnesses in the world? I'm much more interested in the positive outcome. And to be honest, when you break it down, it's all about prevention. Because there's 1 billion people that are sick, and there's 6 billion people that are not sick. It's the 6 billion you want to look at, because we need to prevent mental illnesses in them. So it's an interesting discussion, and I presented a few of my speeches to the World Mental Health Congress on how to eradicate mental illnesses, and what there's a few options I came up with, which is a longer conversation.
Well, I did like also what you mentioned about reconnecting. The idea is I could be right next to a bunch of people, my friends, family, and what I found out, especially even before COVID, but even after, is that we don't connect. We're just there. We're just proximity wise, we're right next to each other. You could be in the house and you just don't feel connected. You could be. I usually use the verb of the term home versus a house. For me, a home describes something more, sometimes less tangible, but it means more than just a house. And a house is just a structure, you shelter, but something about home kind of promotes connecting, whether in your mind or a lot of times home, or you're surrounded by people you do care about. Usually it's not described as a house. House is less
impersonal.
Descriptive. Yeah, impersonal. So I don't know. I just like that concept, because when it comes to unfortunately, even before COVID, you see family gatherings, reunions. Everyone's on their cell phone. I'll admit it. Like, I'm on my cell phone because we're all so busy doing we're not being present with each other. So I do agree with that. So
I think you do see out and about, when you're in your daily routine, you do see signs that say, please be kind to the staff, please be kind to and that's, for me, that's fantastic, because that's exactly what we need. We need more of that, because everybody's a little bit separated, like you say, and if we can draw that out, well, the only way to do that is kindness. And for some of us, we have to learn to be kind. I've had to learn to step down a level and be calm, like you said earlier, and be quiet and peaceful. That's where kindness lives.
Yeah, because as you probably know, everyone has so much different context. But I kind of go back to the model that the problem might be messy, and usually is. It's complicated, but the reasons why we're doing it, why we want to be better, is usually pretty simple. So I kind of try to focus on that when I think about even my own challenges or the people I work with. I want to ask you, what has been the biggest lesson you've learned, or are learning when it comes to starting a new chapter in your life? For those
For
yourself
for
or no?
me,
Yeah.
for me, it's definitely what I said is kindness. Is coming out of those experiences. I would not describe myself as a kind person because I've been through a terribly difficult situation.
Mm-hmm.
If you speak to someone with a mental illness, they're not kind because
Mm-hmm.
they're struggling. You know,
Yeah.
it's unfair to expect them to
Be kind.
to
Yeah.
be to be to be kind all the time. So, um, but when you come out and you recover, also regaining that kindness is something you have to exercise. It's something you have to practice, and I've definitely had to learn to be kind. And a lot of people have told me, be more kind, stop being so
Mm-hmm.
tough, stop being
Mm.
so tough all the time. And I think I'm getting there, but I'm trying to do better really in that area.
And I think also with going through um, mental health or struggles, at least from my experience, is you learn restraint. Because like a lot of times, because you may notice something. At least from my experience, I may notice someone struggling, instead of just leaning toward my biases. And these are things you learn. You kind of you have restraint, and you don't just immediately just respond. And that's something I've at least personally felt I've learned, lesson I learned, because you're right, hurt people hurt people. When you're that hurt in mental health, if you're struggling with either
Yeah,
substance use, I like what you said. It's totally logical, but we don't like to say because it seems messy. But we're going to speak plainly. If you're hurt, likelihood of you hurting others, it's just unfortunately can be a reality, but that
but
doesn't have to be.
but look at the benefits of recovering.
Mm-hmm.
For example, okay, and my psychologist says I'm a little bit outside the norm going to international conferences and telling my
Mm-hmm.
story, but that's not going to be a common thing for everyone because it's a very intimidating situation. But
Mm-hmm.
but I think that recovery leads to excellence.
Mm-hmm.
Or, like in my experience, it leads to some sort of excellence when you can take a very challenging experience
Mm-hmm.
and get through it and recover. Like your quote from Albert Einstein says, your consciousness raises
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and you become a person on a different level and you
Mm-hmm.
become equipped to deal with life in a more on a higher level. I mean, for me, it meant I had a spiritual awakening in the end,
Mm. Yeah.
which is a very sort of extreme, positive experience.
Yeah. And to piggyback on the quote that I shared with Albert Einstein, the opposite's true. If you're gonna use the same kind of mindset that brought you in that situation, usually it's harder to get through it. No, I'm not saying like so. If I'm, it, it- I like the word excellence. I've read it a lot because we didn't say perfect because there's nothing really in the sense perfect.
No,
It's excellence because there's room to strive to better, to be better in this process, and it also provides an avenue of grace that you have for yourself during this process. I want to ask you
yeah.
any final thoughts. We're gonna share. This. When people listen to this, it'll be just turned to 2023. So this is a new year. People are like, what now? They make resolutions that they'll never feel like I never keep these resolutions. What would you want to say as a final thought as we wrap up our talk today?
Well, I'm asking a question at the moment that I don't have the answer to,
Mm,
and the question is there unlocked excellence in people with mental illnesses because they're going through the struggle? Even if you just kicked your toe, that's a struggle, you
mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
And you come out of that a different person. It might only be in a small way,
Mm-hmm.
but every struggle that we go through has an unlocked excellence for us to step into.
Mm.
And I want us to challenge ourselves to reach for that excellence and to recover in a way that excels. And if I can use my story as an example of that and as an inspiration for that, I hope that's what's happening. Is people hear this and go, "Gee, look what this guy's done. Maybe I can do it."
Mm.
And that's why I stand up and talk about this. Not everyone can, but
Well, I that's part of my whole like passion about doing the podcast is that there's so many stories out there that I know impact people in different ways, and I do want to say thank you so much, Keith, for coming on and sharing your insight with us and your
thank you.
story. I always appreciate every guest that I have. It's not easy to come out and just share, but at the same time, it's also inspiring because, like we said, a lot of these things are learned. For us to be kind sometimes, it's learned because a lot of times we get stuck in ourselves. We may be gone through so much, but at the same time, doesn't mean that you can't make that choice to go elsewhere. So I just want to say
Exactly.
thank you so
Thanks
much.
for having me. Thank
No
you for the
problem.
chat.
And I just want to say you can stay updated with Revive Ministries with ReviveMinistriesFL.com. This is our last our last quote. It's from one of my favorite authors from The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's not merely enough to have the ability to be persistent. You must also have the ability to start over.
Too true.